My guest at this time is award-winning journalist for Spectrum Sports 360, who is also the co-host for the Living the Gimmick podcast. It's Jon Alba. Jon, welcome back to welcome to. I don't know that you've ever been here. Welcome to the Wrestling
Daily. I appreciate the invite, Nick. It's a long-awaited debut. I'm friends and colleagues with so many of your colleagues, and now the bringing of the two worlds together.
Well, but see, the thing is, like, I feel like you've been here because we've physically shared space before, right?
Yes, pre-social distancing.
I think that's true. We could be a lot closer, high-fiving things. Nice. But we were both at the AEW, like, Jacksonville initial rally where they announced the promotion, right?
Yeah, and then you were at Fighter Fest as well, right?
I was also at Fighter Fest. But, man, yeah, I remember, like, you being one of the first people that I saw on site at the Jacksonville rally. And I think you helped me get my credential and everything, and we walked around. We walked around for a little bit, just kind of taking it in before all the fans got into the rally. Does that resonate?
Yeah. Well, there was so much uncertainty that day. Like, I mean, no one really knew exactly what it was going to look like, what was going down. It was an easy, short drive. It was about a 2-hour drive for me, but you and many other wrestling media members flew down, I should say, just for it. So
yeah.
Pretty crazy day. And it's in hindsight, in retrospect, it's wild to think about the foundation for everything that we see in pro wrestling today was set on January 8th.
Yeah.
I think it was. So, yeah.
Yeah, dude, because, like, I remember being there. Jericho, I remember Jericho was there. Pac was there. And, like, we kind of, like, knew it. And we were talking about everybody, like, respectfully was just like, let's give them their surprises. You know, I remember those titters beforehand. And it was, like, tough to not be breaking a lot of the stories about who we were and weren't seeing there that day, you know?
Yeah, well, people were just walking around. It's like, oh, there's MJF. Oh, there's Pac, and okay. But yeah, pretty crazy, man. Pretty crazy that's we're looking at a year and a half ago now on that.
Man, was it just a year and a half ago?
Mm-hmm.
God damn. All right. Well, before we talk more about AEW, WWE, and all that, since you are a fresh face here at the Daily, Jon, if you don't mind, tell everybody out there a little bit about yourself, what you do in the world of pro wrestling and sports.
Sure. Well, for my day job, I am a host and a reporter for Spectrum Sports 360, as you said, here in Orlando, Florida. And Tampa. It's a half-hour sports show that runs 7 nights a week. We do long-form sports feature storytelling, and it's a half-hour show that I get to host. In the pro wrestling realm, I've got my podcast I've been doing with Doug McDonald, the Living the Gimmick Pro Wrestling podcast. And I also am the co-host of the Limitless Wrestling podcast. I work on the independent scene as the Emmy Award-winning Jon Alba, who's a very different person from the one you're listening to right now. That guy's more of a jerk. But so kind of have my toes dipped in a lot of different arenas here, Nick.
I've had a lot of things happen on these interviews. I've never had anybody just pull an Emmy into shot.
Well, it's part of the gimmick, so you got to have it ready to go. You know, it's crucial to that. Your boy Justin LeBar can attest to that.
It's true. What's your Emmy for? What'd you win your Emmy for?
That one is for I was a producer at MLB Network and helped produce MLB Tonight prior to my on-air career.
Gotcha.
That was for that. And yeah, we're fingers crossed for Emmy number 2 this year. We're submitting some stuff. I was at the for those sports fans who recall the Daytona 500 this past year with the Ryan Newman crash, which was one of the most insane, violent things I've ever seen in my life. I did like 11 live shots that night. So we're submitting some work for that. So fingers crossed, maybe because that way, like, you know how Owen Hart had the 2 Slammy Awards and it's going to be beyond obnoxious. So fingers crossed here, Nick.
Here, I can't pull an Emmy into shot, but I can pull Owen into shot.
There we go. There we go.
Look at me.
And before all your listeners and viewers think I'm this pretentious, I promise you, it is just a blending of reality and gimmick, and it's a disaster. Anytime you whip it out, it's a disaster.
All right, a conversation for another day, and also let's not whip it out here on this is a video stream. So Jon, let's get to the news of the day here. Now you're in Florida, right? Like you're a journalist in Florida. Before we even get to wrestling, what is it like being in Florida right now with what all you're seeing? There seems to be cases spiking. I heard just this morning Florida could be a new red zone. What's it like for you being in that environment and covering everything that's going on right now in Florida?
Sure. Well, Florida has been one of the states that, for lack of a better term, has pretended things weren't as significant as they may or may not have been.
Correct.
And in the early goings, I think a lot of people were expecting a massive, massive, massive outbreak in Florida. And we didn't really see that. It was kind of surprising. And like Orange County, where I am in the Orlando area, you would think with all the theme parks and all that and all the tourists that come through that it would just be this tremendous hot zone, but it wasn't.
Yeah.
So that kind of allowed Governor DeSantis to make the decree that, things aren't that bad. We're going to move forward. And Florida started reopening a lot earlier than a lot of states did. And then in the last few weeks or so, as reopening has really gone forward, we've seen this pretty significant jump in cases. The good news is, from the data that has been released, is that hospitalizations haven't really gone up.
Right.
So that is a good thing. You're seeing more mild cases for whatever reason that may be. But it certainly has been interesting. Right now we hear all this talk about mask wearing. Mask wearing isn't really a thing in Florida. There's not a lot of mask wearing. So
Wow.
we're going to see a lot of these events going on, and whether it's the NBA or Major League Soccer coming down, living in those bubble scenarios, that's going to be the real test to see how effective these things are. So,
yeah. It feels very much like the canary in the coal mine down in Florida right now. We're going to just kind of see how things go. What do you think? Are you comfortable with everything that's going on right now, or do you think it's moving too fast?
I mean, here's the deal. I've been out in the field since day one of this, given my profession. I am a news reporter, so it hasn't been different. Like, everyone's going into quarantine where it was like, John, get on out there and go out in the field. And it's like, okay. So, I've been wearing a mask since day one. I bring tons of sanitizer everywhere I go. So I'm doing what I can do to stay healthy. And if I'm going to be put in a situation where I don't feel safe, I'm not going to go into that situation. And my bosses at Charter and Spectrum have told us, if you do not feel comfortable doing something, don't do it. So, I respect that, and that's kind of where it's at right now. Would I want to be in a crowd of thousands of people attending an event right now? I don't think so. No, that's just my personal preference. There are other people who are totally okay with it. So to each their own, I guess, Nick.
Okay. Well, how do you feel about DeSantis's relationship with the McMahons and AEW and getting them labeled as essential? What was it like for you covering that? What was your take on what happened there?
Yeah, well, I don't want to so much give a take because I was the one who kind of broke that news and that correlation between the Super PAC donation to the America First, from the America First Super PAC to the Florida GOP.
Yeah.
I say to people, draw your own conclusions to that. The timing of everything was definitely potentially very coincidental, if you believe in coincidence, or if you're trying to look further, maybe it was something more. I think Governor DeSantis has been pretty forward about wanting to get things back and making Florida a hub for everything. And maybe that was part of it. And listen, WWE and AEW and UFC all took advantage of it. So it didn't stop their businesses. AEW, for all intents and purposes, from what we've seen, has been able to conduct their events safely. UFC, outside of the one positive test that it had, was able to run its events safely. WWE right now may be a little late to the party when it comes to COVID testing. So
right,
we have to see how that unfolds.
Yeah. It's interesting right now because, like, last week on the post-takeover call, Hunter was asked about their testing, right? And he said that, we don't use the test because the tests don't work. They're not 100% sure. And what we were doing is already working, so why would we buck the system? And now this week, it's like the tone has completely changed here in regards to testing and things. What do you think about that about face there from the promotion?
You don't want to be caught with your pants down, right? Like, right. That's the worst thing, especially as a publicly traded company, that can happen. And I think the general consensus is that is what happened. And there was this positive test for the second time. And rather than what happened the first time where there was an internal memo sent out, it was publicly put forth before anyone else heard.
Right.
And I think that established some bad faith, at least with some of the people that I've spoken to about it. And there's a lot of hesitation. I commend them for getting the large group testing together pretty quickly after that. And as some of the reporting that we've been doing about the fans, they've told the quote unquote fans that have been in attendance that they're not coming down on them for wanting to wear masks if they want to, but they did say that if they wanted to attend, they did have to get this rapid testing. So
sure. And do you think that that's on the level where, because we've heard conflicting reports. We've heard your report where you had several fans tell you that they were not pressured to not wear masks, but then you have Brian Alvarez over on the Observer saying Kevin Dunn is telling people if you wear masks, you're not a fan, so you're not going to be on TV. What's your take on the conflicting reports?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I said this on social media too. I am not at all discrediting Brian Alvarez or anyone else who has reported these things. Brian Alvarez has a proven track record of success, as does Dave Meltzer and anyone else. I am not discrediting someone else's reporting. What they heard, they heard. I can only speak to what I've been told. Right. And I personally reached out to several people who were in attendance. Several people, not one person, as some have speculated. And independently, not together, they all verified the same exact thing. Yeah. So there was no pressure from one of them. And I've gotten a common response I've seen from people has been, well, of course they're going to protect the company because they were invited, so they're going to want to be invited back. When you offer confidentiality to someone and identity protection, there's no incentive for them to lie.
Right.
So I've universally been told the same thing, that we never felt pressured that we couldn't wear our mask. Some of us were wearing masks before the taping started, and we wanted to yell and scream, so we took them off. It was a common thing that I heard from people. Okay. So all I can speak to is what I've been told, Nick, and what I had been told yesterday too, where we reported that the fans were offered a chance to return, but if they wanted to return, then they had to get tested and they wouldn't be allowed in. And I didn't even really report this the other day. I talked a little bit about it on our Living the Gimmick Patreon, but there were people on Monday prior to the COVID testing who were turned away for not passing temperature checks. Oh. So it's not just everyone was universally let in. Right. So I think it's a good thing that they are doing the COVID testing now. The real question then becomes, is this going to be consistent? Are they going to continue to do this COVID testing week in and week out?
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things I wonder about, because you talked to, do you think it has to do with the culture of Florida? Like, that's the reason that they didn't feel pressure, is because like this is just more what they're, because it sounds like everybody who's being brought in, fans and wise, would be of the area where what you were describing before is more the norm for them. They don't feel uncomfortable not wearing masks.
You're gonna find different opinions, obviously, based on your political beliefs, on your human beliefs, on all that stuff. So I reached out to several of those fans who were in attendance, and universally, every single person I reached out to told me it did not bother them that there was a positive COVID test, that they would be there come hell or high water regardless. Is that going to be the opinion of everybody? No, that's not going to be the opinion of everybody. Me personally, if I was around someone who I knew tested positive for COVID, or there had been a chance of a possible transmission, me personally, I would not want to be in that environment. But everyone's going to be different, right? So I think you just have to take it at surface level when it comes to what you're talking about, where WWE kind of did this about face of, okay, now we're going to do the COVID testing. It wasn't really a big deal before, whereas AEW, since it started its Florida tapings, has been, we are doing this COVID testing. I think maybe that speaks to the personal beliefs of the people at the top and how they personally feel about the virus, and maybe their political leanings. I don't know. Tony Khan, I don't know his personal political beliefs, but from what we've seen on social media, you can draw your own conclusions as to which way he leans. But His father was also a donor to the Trump campaign in the first time around. So who's to say what someone's political beliefs are? I think it comes down to your personal morals, your personal values, and how you feel about that.
Now, with WWE, do you think that the COVID tests are going to be daily now, or is it weekly? Because I believe with AEW, it's like they do the test at the top of the week, and then it's temperature checks by day. Do you think that that'll be WWE's route, or do you anticipate them now maybe getting even a little tighter here and doing daily COVID testing?
Yeah, I have no idea, because I think, as we saw on how Tuesdays and Wednesdays procedures went, it doesn't sound like it was too smooth. Yeah. So I think they need to figure out what is going to be our game plan here. How are we going to go about this the most efficient way you can do it? AEW, as you said, does do the testing, and And I was speaking to someone in AEW last night about more of their procedures just to get a better understanding of how they go about doing things.
Okay.
And I think there is, and I tweeted about this too, there is certainly more thoroughness put into it rather than just, we're going to test once at the beginning of the week for the tapings and go from there. There is more put into it. I think right now the company that deserves the most props, if you will, for how safe they've done it is New Japan,
Right.
where New Japan has gone above and beyond, as we've seen so far in the early goings here of them returning. First, they took a break, and then they've got commentators sitting 6 feet apart. They got the glass between them. Wrestlers are not in the crowd. Fans are not in the crowd. The wrestlers in tag matches are outside the ring at certain points. So it's all going to be detrimental, man, based on, I think, the people at the top and how they personally feel about this thing.
I think the safest promotion, at least to this point still, is Ring of Honor, who has chosen to not do any wrestling.
And nor has MLW for that matter as well.
Yeah, correct. So there are people that have like completely held out, and we'll see if that's a gamble that pays off here. I know that I've talked to people in both ROH and MLW where they're like, this is drawing board time for us. You know, everybody else can go out there and go through the headaches of dealing with the day-to-day of this. But, you know, when we get the green light again, they're going to come out of the chute. I'm really interested to see, especially with Ring of Honor, because Marty Scurll getting that role, top of the year, surprising everybody. They thought it was a given for AEW. I feel like ROH could really come out of the chute on the other side of this thing, maybe better and more popular than when they left it, you know?
Yeah, and I think that will really test, because when this all went down, we were all like, maybe this is the time for pro wrestling to take a break. Take a break, refresh, get a little mini off-season in here, and come back refreshed and better than ever.
Yeah.
And most companies chose not to do that. And we've seen ratings across the board and viewership across the board has been down. So I think you're right in that we'll see what companies like Ring of Honor and MLW do. Is there going to be that thirst where people are like, yes, I'm ready for it to return. I'm hotter about this product than ever. Or is it going to be burnout? We'll find out.
Yeah, well, the you know, and I know we're just kind of shooting the shiz at, so to speak here, but like I feel like Impact is in the position to reap the most benefits right now, because if you're not at WWE and AEW's full, they like you, but like, you know, they're doing something different. Impact, I feel like, is sitting there with open arms, waiting to just kind of welcome in as many of these name value players as they can to help establish their brand and build during this time, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what they're going to do, and we'll see with Slammiversary coming up how all that is implemented. But I've spoken to some people at Impact. I haven't gotten the full length of their testing procedures and what they're doing there to keep talent safe.
Right.
But I have spoken to talent who have told me they don't feel unsafe at Impact. Right. So yeah, that's a good thing, I guess.
Same thing, where it's like a little bit more ambiguous on what they're doing, but. You know, we'll see. They're a little smaller. They're a little more under the radar at the moment. But anyway, let's go back to WWE here real quick. One of the things I wanted to ask you about was Kevin Owens didn't show up at the Raw tapings. Much like Roman Reigns, it sounds like he was just worried about his health and safety, the health and safety of his family. What's your take on when you see these big name players decide not to work? And do you really believe that this decision is not held against them by the company?
How can you hold anything against someone for looking out for their health or their family? It's really hard morally to do that, right? And I don't know. I think this is strictly my opinion, and I have nothing telling me this right now, but in WWE, if you are someone who is higher up on the totem pole, I don't think anything will really be held against you because you have that quote unquote immunity. And we have heard in the past 3 months that there are some performers who do feel like their position would be at risk if they were to take a step back, even though they've been told one thing. If you recall, I brought to light that video about a month and a half ago of that Orange County Board of Commissioners meeting where that John Doe employee called in and said, hey, I don't feel safe here. People don't feel safe, but they're afraid to speak up because they might lose their job. So
right.
Maybe that was valid. Maybe that was invalid. I do think from who I've spoken to in AEW, none of them feel like their spots are at risk if they feel unsafe going. We saw for more than a month, there were several talent who said, I'm going to stay at home and not travel and do this. And their spots were unaffected. So yeah. It's all dependent on the culture of the company, and I think we've reached a point where pretty much across the board, you're not going to get punished for taking a step back and not going. But maybe early on there was a little tension. I'm not really sure to that. I don't want to speculate on something that I'm not entirely sure about.
Sure, and I'm going to ask you something that's real inside baseball, and maybe, and if you're just going to speculate, maybe there's nothing here to discuss. But one thing that I've been wondering about is with these talents like Owens and Reigns and Zayn, who've decided not to compete at this time. Much like with injuries, what we've heard about, contracts get extended now, I guess, which didn't always seem to be a thing in years past. I don't know when this became a thing, but like you get injured, you're out 8 months, 8 months get added to your contract. Do you believe that if like Roman Reigns right now decides to stay out for whatever, year and a half, 2 years till we get a vaccine, do you think that all gets added onto the contract, much like it would an injury?
I would imagine that it would have to be on a case-by-case basis kind of thing because, I mean, like you said, if Roman Reigns were to sit out a year plus, obviously Vince McMahon is going to want to look into that investment and say, hey, how can we maximize this? And maybe they were to establish something in good faith to extend upon that. But I just can't imagine a scenario, and from the limited law knowledge that I have, where someone choosing not to work during a global pandemic would hold up in court, where like if a company tried to hold something against an employee for that, I'm not sure how that would hold up in court. Maybe I'm totally wrong. I'm not the right guy to ask on that, but it's perhaps a little different with an injury per se. But I'm not entirely sure. I think from a moral standpoint, it's pretty hard to hold that against someone. But we're not heading a publicly traded multi-billion-dollar company either. So
I was about to say, I think they deal with a different moral compass than we do, John. So it's like sometimes I have to like literally remove myself from the box and think outside of it. So
right. And I would hope that wouldn't be held against someone, and contractually you can find something in good faith. But I'm not a lawyer either. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, anyway, John, I really just want to thank you for taking the time, man. You're so on the spot with all of this stuff right now, and you're so in tune with what's all is going on. I mean, your reporting has been fantastic, man. And like,
thank you.
It's not just good insight for, the fans out there, but I feel like you are helping to provide a degree of accountability right now, for what's going on. I'm sure there are a lot of performers and people in the business that appreciate what you're doing right now.
Well, I appreciate those kind words, Nick. And I want to say this because I think there are some people who may not necessarily be familiar with my work, and they're like, "Oh, he's just a news reporter covering this wrestling story." Like, I've been a pro wrestling fan for 20 plus years, and I do think when it comes to pro wrestling reporting, we have a duty to be better in terms of our ethics. And I mean, you remember at the AEW rally when. There were some softball questions, and AEW and Cody and all that were talking about how AEW is going to be at the forefront with healthcare, and I was just like, "What are going to be the healthcare situation?"
I beat you to that question. I got to Cody first. I grabbed him right out. I don't know if you remember this or not, but I grabbed him. There's like a 2-minute video. He's like, I've never met this man. I'm bigger than Tony. I've got my arm around him. And then I got the question in, and then I think you were right after me, but we were both in there. I remember that.
But my point being here, it's like, you got to ask the important questions because these are people at the end of the day. And obviously wrestling news sites and reporting has had its history of up and down. But I will say this, I'm encouraged by what we've seen over the last couple of years where more people are establishing credibility and kind of shutting out the bottom feeders of the industry. And I think if we can all aim to do ethical reporting and tell good stories, then we're all doing a public service.
I agree with that. Amen. Hey, do we ever get to the bottom of the AEW health insurance thing now that I'm thinking about it again? Do we know where everybody stands? Like,
I think it varies on a case-by-case basis from what I understand. So
okay,
we'll have to follow that up. We'll do a 5-year moratorium and then take a look back.
I don't think Tony Khan wanted us to meet up today and have this conversation. And he's like, no, wait, guys, you're supposed to be talk about the other stuff. Talk about the other stuff. So anyway, John, one last time here, where do you want to send people to find you, follow you, promote you, all those other great things?
Sure. Well, you can find me on Twitter at Jon Alba. That's definitely where I'm most active, JONALBA. And check out the Living the Gimmick Pro Wrestling podcast. Myself and Doug McDonald drop that every single Tuesday, and we have a Patreon for that as well with a ton of bonus content, including watch-alongs and some bonus preview and review shows. Patreon.com /living the gimmick.